Hi everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to make these completely do-it-yourself Christmas cards. So you don't need any supplies to make this card aside from the coloring medium of your choice, a pencil, and some paper. I am going to be using watercolors and watercolor paper to make this card, but you could use colored pencils, you could use markers, really any medium that you like I think would work. I'm going to show you the techniques to come up with the do-it-yourself design, and then just how to just easily draw some simple winter foliage. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you're going to follow along in watercolor with me, I'm using a size 2 brush here, and I have some green that I've mixed up. It's a combination of Hooker's green and then a purple. I can't remember the name of the purple, but any kind of cool purple should work for this to give you a nice like hunter green. And we're just going to make these little pine leaves. And to do it, I start by drawing a diagonal line that kind of sticks out from that little border that I drew in with a pencil. And I drew that border about a half an inch all the way around the card base. And this is a 5.5 by, no, I'm sorry, it's a 6 by 4.5 inch card here, because I was working with a watercolor paper pad that was 9 by 12. So I just cut it into 4s. So I'm just going to go all around the border here, just kind of alternating where I put my little stalk. So this one I'm going to put towards the inside. The next one I'm going to have face the outside. And I'm just going to keep doing that all the way around. So I draw my center stalk to kind of start the little piece of pine. And then I just draw branches coming out of it on either side with these little thin strokes. And it's really simple. You just alternate from going from inside to outside. And you always start with your center stalk on a diagonal, and then it's really easy to follow along, adding in the little pine needles with just those little diagonal lines kind of sticking out there. So I'm just going to speed up the video a little bit as we just work our way all the way around the border here. So one important thing to just keep in mind when you're doing your border, you want to make sure your leaves are all pointing in the same direction. So just keep following this path. Once you kind of start in one corner, just keep going in the same direction until you get all the way around. And once we finish up our border, we're going to add a couple of elements here. We're going to add some pine cones, some berries, and then some other shaped maybe holly leaves as well. And then for the center of the card, if you have nice handwriting, you can add, a nice note. I unfortunately do not have nice handwriting, so I'm going to show you how to draw a little hand-drawn Christmas tree that's real simple in the center. But you could use a stamp if you like to stamp a design in. You can use a die cut sentiment, a stamp sentiment, totally up to you. Okay, so now I have finished our first layer of foliage. Now we're going to move on to our pine cones. So to start the pine cone, I make a little upside down triangle, and then I make 2 little upside down triangles on either side of it, and then just fill in that hollow area with another like diamond shaped piece. And then I just build out my upside down triangles for that 3rd layer. And then I kind of make them a little smaller for that 4th layer. So let's watch this one more time. And the trick to this is definitely make sure you leave white space in between your little pine cone petals there, or spines. I think someone told me they were called spines, or maybe I'm misremembering the word. But that's going to make it look like it's a pine cone. If it's all brown, it's just going to look like a blob. So you do the most important part, I think, of this kind of abstract design for a pine cone that's simple to execute, is to leave that white space. So I'm going to make a couple more pine cones. This little guy is pointing downward, so he's pointing towards the inside of the center, as will this pine cone as well. Oh no, this little guy is pointing upward. So yeah. So we'll just finish that one with just a whole bunch of, it's like a little rounded pyramid of upside down triangles. That's how I like to think of these little pine cone designs that I have been adding to my cards lately and enjoying it a lot. We are going to make these little pine cone shapes come to life when we add the second layer of color. That's going to help to make it look like there's a lip on each of those little pine cone petals. But we will need to let it dry first. Now we're going to add our berries. And for the berries, I want to leave a little white dot in the center, just so that the berries don't look flat. So it looks like, there's just a little bit of a shine coming off the berry. You can leave your little white spot, wherever. I like mine look like they're kind of towards the center, I think just because it was easiest for me to do, but you could have them kind of off to one end. If you paint over it and you don't get a white spot in the center, then you can just add it in with a gel pen later. But it's a really cool look, and it's a good way to practice leaving white space in your watercoloring by working on these little berries and leaving that little bit of white space, because that is a skill that you're going to need as you get more into watercoloring, because at least that's what I've been finding has been helping me with my work. Like it helps to make an illustration or a painting look much less flat when there are some like strategic little areas of untouched watercolor paper or white space in a design. Okay, so now we'll move on to our holly branches. So these are a little bit weird shaped. What I'm trying to do is here, I draw a line down the center, and then I draw two diagonal lines, and then I connect them with that little scoop there. And then I just color it in. So that's how I get the holly leaf shape. Now, that one I did a pretty good job on, but there are going to be some others that I don't do the best job on. They just kind of look a little shapeless, but that's okay. We're going to have some other foliage in here covering them over, and we're just really adding in these other leaves just to have a different shape going on, even if it's like not the coolest looking shape. Here's one where I would say I didn't do the best job on shaping it, but it's giving us another shape. It's giving us another color. So it's adding just a little bit more interest to this little piece, and you're really not going to notice them so much in the end. It's just nice to have a different element. So I'm just adding those wherever I feel like I have a little bit of an open space, or I want a little bit of a different green color to go on. So for each of the elements that I'm adding, I am using a different color. So the pine cones I colored in with sepia. The original pine needles we did with that mixture of hooker's green and then purple. And then these leaves I think are sap green that we're adding now. And then the berries, I use pyrrole scarlet for those berries, but I think there's probably lots of other reds that you could use as well. Again, it's really up to you which colors that you use here. I think the one tip to remember is just to use a different color for each element that you add in, or a different shade. Maybe that's a better way to say it, since it is a lot of green we have here. And let's see. So now I'm going to add another. Now I'm getting like really lazy with my holly leaves, and I'm just making like little raggedy shapes instead of following that other technique. But as you see, it looks okay. It's just giving a little bit of a pop of color and a little bit of a different shape to add some interest to the background here. This is a really meditative card to make. You can just kind of, not think much and just sort of doodle with your paintbrush as you're filling in your design. I'm going to add some stems to the berries here with that same sepia color that I used for the pine cones. And I'm just adding little stems, connecting them together, and then making sure they're not kind of like just floating in space on the card. Now we're adding that second layer to the pine cone. So I just add a thin strip of paint right along the very bottom, so that it looks like there's a little bit of a curve in the petal when you add in the shading that way. And it's really, really simple. You don't have to think. Just put like a little strip or a dot of color at the bottom of each of those petals. And for this guy, because he is facing downwards, the color is going to go on still on the bottom of the petal, but we're putting it on the top when you're looking at it on screen. I'm going to add a second layer of color to our berries. This is some Paraline Maroon, just to add a little bit of darkness there. I think it also would have looked fine to just leave the berries with that pretty bright red color as well if you like. It just depends on what kind of mood you're in, whether you have bright berries or you have these more like dark contoured berries. Now I'm going to add one more element, and this I took a little bit of a turquoise colored paint, and just very faintly I'm just adding some more pine needles wherever it looks like we need another element. So it's that same shape that we did in the beginning with a slightly different color with a little bit of a turquoise tint to it. Yeah, and it's a very, very diluted color as well, because I just wanted it to look like they were kind of in the background, just kind of filling out the little border there. Okay, so now we are done with our border. So let's take off the painter's tape. I taped this down just so that it didn't move around on screen. There's not so much water on here that you need to have painter's tape if you're doing it at home. And let's take a look at it this way. So you can use this landscape or portrait. It's up to you. We are going to use it in portrait form, and now we're going to add in our little Christmas tree. So I'm going to find the center of our card. I'm just going to leave a little dot. So we're going to draw like a long triangle for our Christmas tree, and then we're just going to paint it in. I'm going to line up that dot with the corner, the either corner there on the edge. So this way I know that it'll be symmetrical on either side, and then I'll just, about 2/3 of the way down the paper, I'll add the base of the tree. Use my little mono eraser. I love this eraser. It's awesome for getting into small places. It's by Tombow. And I'll just erase some of the pencil lines there, and then add in our little tree trunk, just drawing it in by hand with a little rectangle. And now I'm going to add a star to the top of the tree. So if you have a star stamp, you could add that. If you have a better way of drawing a star, go for that. I just I don't really have a technique here. I just kind of as you see, I struggled a little bit getting my star. So whatever works for you to get your star up there, I just tried to hand draw it, not following any formula. And then I'm just going to erase a lot of the lines, just because we're going to add yellow paint here, and the pencil will show through unless I get most of that guide off. Now we're going to add our paint. So I have a very, very light, a very, very diluted green here. This is the same green that we used to add the pine needles in the beginning, but it's just much more diluted. And I'm just going to fill in my triangle with that diluted paint. And then if you want, you could stop here. I thought that would be fun to try to add a little bit of texture to the pine tree as well, to make it look like there's some pine needles. So I'm using a wet on wet technique here. So to start, I'm just going to add the shading in just along one side, just dropping in some color. This is undersea green, which is just a darker green than that mixture we used. Just letting it bleed in. And now I'm going to take some more concentrated paint of that undersea green and just draw these little needles in with a wet on wet technique. So the tree is wet, and then the paint that I'm adding is wet. Well, of course it's wet. And then I'm just going to let it bleed in. So we just want it to give a little bit of texture here, making sure that the center of the tree is a little lighter than the top and the bottom, just to add some interest. And then I'm going to carefully color in our star, being careful not to touch the green paint because it's wet and it would bleed. I'm using lemon yellow here, and then a little nickel azo yellow on top, just to give a little bit of interest. And then some sepia on the bottom, being careful not to let it touch the green of the tree too much, because then it would bleed. And I'm just adding a little darker paint towards the bottom there. Now I'm going to take my heat gun and just dry our little Christmas tree. And then once it's dry, and again, you could leave it at this point. You don't need to add any more detail, but I thought let's go one more stage and use a little dry on wet technique. So I'm taking the undersea green again and a thinner paintbrush this time, and I'm going to add in the pine needles. And I'm not going to blend them in. I'm just going to add them in layers. So I added a layer along the bottom, and now we'll add this layer right above that, and then we'll just keep going until we fill in the whole tree with little layers of these pine needles, just like a tree would look like in real life, although this is still kind of an abstract tree. And one word to the wise, I didn't follow this rule, but it would be good if you did. When you're adding your strokes, go from top to bottom. You'll get more realistic needles that way. I think I was going bottom to top just because I couldn't move the paper around because I was filming, and it was just easier for my hand to go in that direction. But you'll get better technique, better results if you add your strokes top down, because that's the way a petal would, not a petal, a pine needle would look. Could add another layer of that nickel azo yellow onto the star, and just a little bit more shading with this sepia on the tree trunk there, just to make it look a little bit more dimensional, a little bit more, give it a little more pop. And then I think that is gonna, well, no, we have one more step. Just gonna dry the tree again, and now we're gonna add some decoration with our white gel pen. And I'm just gonna add tiny little, maybe they're Christmas balls, maybe they're snow. Not sure, but I just thought it would add a little bit of pop to the Christmas tree. You could add, another thing you could do if you didn't want to add the texture with the pine needles, you could just leave the tree a flat green and then maybe make a design on the Christmas tree with maybe some parallel stripes or some horizontal stripes. You could put some garland on it, make it look like they're twinkling lights. So lots of things you could do there. All right, so here is our first card. So real easy. You don't need any stamps or dies to make this card. Just something to paint with, something to write on, and that's it. And here's our second version. So as you see here, I didn't put the pine needles on that second one. I did a more abstract version and added some little garland with my white gel pen, and then tiny little Christmas lights as well. And that is it. So I hope that you guys give this card a try. It is so much fun. It's so relaxing to make. And I think that it would really make anyone that you send it to feel really, really special this holiday season. All right, guys, have a great day, and I will see you again soon in the next video.